There were all kinds of media reports about lawlessness on the streets of New Orleans. This was what the big media storyline was. Black people in New Orleans are behaving badly in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. The problem was that wasn't really true.
And the city was a black city. So there was a presumption that there would be danger. And the American people only knew what they saw on television. So perception became reality. Back then we called it rumors. Now we call it misinformation. I call that survival.
That's the way we are told to see this event. It was overblown. In fact, it was evidence the media was racist, and we should think twice before taking what the media says at face value. As Russell Honore said, they were making perception reality. Yet this very same principle applies to them, and in fact, it is they who are lying. Not only was the crime and violence taking place in New Orleans in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina bad, but it is worse than what was originally reported. Just a heads up, I will be using phrases and censoring certain words in this video. I would like to have this video and this channel monetized eventually, so if you don't like that, get over it. On the flip side, if you watch this video and enjoy it, subscribe and like. I'll be making videos like this regardless of the outcome as long as the channel stays up, so prepare for that. Also, all the sources are in the comments and the description. Back to the video. At the time, Mayor Ray Nagin and Chief of Police Eddie Compass were telling the media, as recorded here in 60 Minutes, that police were radioing that they were running out of ammo in gun battles, and that when first responders were being sent in, they were being shot at.
I mean, there's stories that, are unbelievable. Police officers crying, screaming over the radio, "I'm under fire, help, I'm running out of ammunition." My assistant police chief basically said that's the first time in 25 years he ever heard of a police officer in the city of New Orleans saying he's getting ready to run out of ammo in a gunfight.
Later, he tried to tell us what the last 2 weeks have been like.
Imagine holding a city together with no communications, no resources, no ammunition, doing search and rescue, then switching from search and rescue to tactical because the individuals started at the fire trucks and the search and rescue teams.
The story goes that they were repeating things that they had heard from others, and these things didn't turn out to be true.
I didn't want to hide anything from the people, and I was so dead set on not covering anything up that things that were reported to me, I reported them quickly without getting verification, the way it would have been under normal circumstances. So when my tactical guys said that a sniper was at our officers, I reported that sniper was police officers.
The chaos was truly overblown not only by the media, but by those in charge and on the ground. Well, here's some facts about who was in charge and on the ground.
New Orleans was 67% black, and about half of the blacks were poor. And of the city's 480,000 people, all but an estimated 80 to 100,000 left before the hurricane struck. And they had been warned it's going to be bad, clear out. But this means that aside from patients in hospitals and a few eccentrics in the French Quarter, most of the people who stayed behind were not just blacks, but lower class blacks without the means or the foresight to leave.
The police force was also a majority black, and many of the key positions in the local government were also held by blacks as well. Something the mayor prided himself on.
It's time. It's time for us to come together. It's time for us to rebuild a New Orleans, the one that should be a chocolate New Orleans. And I don't care what people are saying uptown or wherever they are. This city will be chocolate at the end of the day. This city will be a majority African American city.
These facts may or may not have anything to do with what we are about to cover in this video. These facts may or may not have played a role in mercenaries being hired by rich whites and Jews to protect their stuff. Yes, before the levees broke and the water flooded the city and the real chaos began to break out, ISI and Blackwater mercenaries were on the ground, and their numbers, mainly Blackwaters, continued to build throughout the days as the non-existent violence began to spread. This article came out on the 11th of September. That's a day from 2 weeks after Katrina hit, and here is what it says. David Reagan, 52, a semi-retired U.S. Army colonel from Huntsville, Alabama, who fought in the First Gulf War and is commander of Blackwater's operations in the city, refused to say how many men he had in New Orleans, but indicated it was in the hundreds. Reason would tell me that if the initial reports of violence and chaos weren't real, then the money would not be wasted on mercs who would be standing around. Another article from even later in the month on the 22nd of September expanded not only the amount of mercenaries on the ground, but the amount of companies involved too. NPR reported 2 years after the fact that there was in fact 600 Blackwater mercenaries in the city of New Orleans during the immediate aftermath of Hurricane Katrina.
We've been here a couple days.
Yeah. Who are you working for?
Blackwater.
And who are they working for?
I really don't have any way to tell you that. You know, we just do our assignments and go from there.
What's your assignment today?
I'm not at liberty to discuss. I'm sorry.
In a lot of ways, it was more shocking and disturbing than anything I encountered in Iraq and Afghanistan.
This former Blackwater contractor, who does not want to be identified, was among the first on the scene.
It was just chaos. There was animals eating dead bodies.
There's a dead body right there. They got 7 more inside the convention center right now. And you know what the New Orleans police say about this here? We can't do nothing.
It was one of the most surreal moments in my life.
They brought this body out here and left it over there. They got children over there. You can't leave this body over there with them children now.
And I remember thinking to myself, wow, this is what the end of the world looks like.
Things are moving so fast, Blackwater arrives without a contract, but claiming they have authorization to shoot if necessary. Soon, at a fee of almost $250,000 a day, the Department of Homeland Security officially hires the firm to help local and state authorities patrol the streets.
Again, the fact the services of mercenaries were being used at such a rate speaks against the idea that things were not as bad as the media was portraying. Yet another piece of info speaks against that too, and that is that on the 2nd of September, just 4 days after the storm hit, the Army Times released an article with the headline, "Troops Begin Combat Operations in New Orleans." It was so bad the mayor had to make the call to stop search and rescue missions so they could focus their attention on the rampant violence and chaos happening.
That's when the mayor says, let's stop search and rescue and bring our force back to controlling the streets. Let's stop the looting, let's stop the lawlessness, and let's put our police officers on the streets. Riley says, we will do that, and the mayor said, let's stop this crap now.
And it didn't take long to start. On the 30th, stores were already being looted, not just food and clothing, but really anything they could take off the shelves. Here is a series of quotes documenting this. One man was packing his van so full of computers, televisions, and DVD players that he had trouble closing the rear doors. Another man used a table to break into one of the last unscathed jewelry cases. The widespread plundering started before Katrina had finished its onslaught Tuesday. That afternoon, looters broke into an emptied sporting goods warehouse in Mid-City, a grocery store in Trem, and the hardware center uptown. In one instance, witnesses said, police were called but did nothing until one man shot another. But the overwhelming feeling was one of chaos. angry shouting, carts ramming, fast grabbing. When a teenage girl passed out face down between the baby clothes and a woman's sock display, people pushed past or stepped on her. Joseph Lacasio of Picayune, Mississippi, stopped to try to help the girl. He rolled her over, and she vomited pink liquid all over her face and hair. He then rolled her back. "This is messed up," he said. "People just walking around like they don't care. All they're worried about is getting free bullshit instead of a human life." The looters weren't just made up of citizens, but also the predominantly black police force. Law enforcement efforts to contain the emergency left by Katrina slipped into chaos in parts of New Orleans Tuesday, with some police officers and firefighters even joining looters and picking stores clean. At the Walmart on Chapatoulas Street, an initial effort to hand out provisions to stranded citizens quickly disintegrated into mass looting. Authorities at the scene said bedlam erupted after the giveaway was announced over the radio. While many people carried out food and essential supplies, others cleared out jewelry racks and carted out computers, TVs, and appliances on hand trucks. Some officers joined in, taking whatever they could, including one New Orleans cop who loaded a shopping cart with a compact computer and a 27-inch flat-screen television. Officers claimed there was nothing they could do to contain the anarchy, saying their radio communications had broken down and they had no direction from commanders. "We don't have enough cops to stop it," an officer said. "A mass riot would break out if you tried." At one store, a policeman broke the glass on the DVD case so civilians would not cut themselves trying to break it. But one man was ungrateful. "The police got all the best stuff," he said. "They crookeder than us." One woman stocking up on makeup was glad to see the officers. "It must be legal," she said. "The police are taking stuff too." The looting and chaos was so bad that when the mayor announced it was turning from search and rescue to law enforcement, many officers quit on the spot. Colonel Henry Whitehorn, chief of the Louisiana State Police, said he heard of numerous instances of New Orleans police officers, many of whom from flooded areas, turning in their badges. They indicated that they had lost everything and didn't feel that it was worth them going back to take fire from looters. Seen in this footage, multiple officers were caught on camera looting a Walmart.
A lot of the people here say they don't feel bad taking this stuff. One, because they need it. But two, they said the police said it was okay. And we actually saw the police. They're in aisle 3.
Hold on to it. How you doing?
Hi, what you doing here?
I'm doing my job.
Taking shoes?
No, looking for looters.
Looking for looters? And what do you do when you find them? Because I think I've seen them.
That's all I can do with them right now, sir.
They're all around us, though.
That's what I see, include you. What are you doing?
I haven't taken anything, ma'am.
But you're in the store, huh?
Lastly, a tourist reported she asked a police officer for help, and she was told to go to hell. It's every man for himself. It goes on and on. This is, funnily enough, the thing some of those that stayed behind feared. Residents that stayed behind were later asked why they didn't leave, and their explicit answer was fear of having their things looted, not just by their own kind, but by those supposed to protect them. The following are a sample of comments. "I could not leave my house. I had too much valuable stuff." "You could not trust the police to protect your stuff. They were stealing too." The police that weren't turning in their badges or looting themselves and actually stayed to do their job were being shot in the head just the next day after the storm hit. And this happened.
New Orleans police officer Kevin Thomas stopped 4 suspicious men at this Chevron in the city's West Bank. 3 cooperated, but when he went to frisk the 4th, a bullet from a .45 ripped through his head. This savage attack that almost took his life.
It doesn't exactly feel like this was actually all that overblown at this point, but it gets worse. Rescue efforts were repeatedly stopped after helicopters were being shot at, something that Russell Honore said was just people firing their guns into the air to attract attention, but this is contradicted by Major Joey Broussard, who said this: "We are trying to do our job here, but we can't if they are shooting at us. We don't know who, and we don't know why. but we don't want to get in a situation of having to return fire. Some of you watching may be a bit older. You may remember these details and watched as they tried to later clean up the facts and take some of the stuff back, or just outright ignore it. But for me, and I'm sure many in my generation or younger, we never heard any of this. Only with the recent 20-year anniversary that happened did I see people bring this kind of information forward instead of the same old tired narrative that the reason things were so bad is because white people are the most evil racists. And I mean really, when we get to the end of this video and I tell you what they think caused the flooding, just wait. If you know, you know. We still haven't even gotten to the Superdome yet, but we'll get there. No, we still have more of this third world activity to cover because the levels of depravity reach deeper and deeper. Again, this kind of stuff is supposed to be misreporting, but I'll let you be the judge given what we've already covered and confirmed. Despite the urgency of the situation for victims in need of rescue, Nagin ordered the city's police force Wednesday night to discontinue such missions and return to the streets to counter waves of looting that had turned violent. They're starting to get closer to heavily populated areas, hotels, hospitals, and we're going to stop it right now, Nagin said. The mayor said 1,500 police officers, nearly the entire department, were being redeployed on the city's remaining stretches of dry land. At flood-swamped Charity Hospital, looters with handguns forced doctors to give up stores of narcotics. Walmart gun racks and ammunition supplies were stripped. Later on in the article, looters moved freely through New Orleans' shuttered shopping districts Wednesday, wading through floodwaters with mounds of clothing, jewelry, and stolen guns. On the few spits of dry land, there were carjackings. One furious city resident surrendered his pickup truck to a machete-wielding assailant. Nagin acknowledged that there were too few officers to stop the crime wave. "We are going to try to contain the looting," he said, "but we know that we are not going to be able to stop it." Last quote from the article, Louisiana National Guard First Sergeant John Jewell said guard snipers had been sent into flooded Charity Hospital to try to find looters who were seen racing through the facility with pistols. The looting of hospitals, and as reported, attacks on EMS workers didn't stop there. A man running a private ambulance company was reported by CNN to say this, "My people are in harm's way," he said. "They are scared. Our command station about an hour ago had the generator stolen off the back of it. We've had an ambulance turned over. Things are not good in New Orleans. It's very serious now." Reported on the 1st of September, another CNN report has a doctor telling his account. "We were coming in from a parking deck at Tulane Medical Center, and a guy in a white shirt started firing at us," Curiel said. The National Guard wearing flak jackets tried to get a bead on this guy. The first incident happened around 11:30 a.m. as Curiel and his National Guard escorts headed back to the hospital after dropping off several patients at nearby Tulane Medical Center to be evacuated by helicopter. Charity shares a helipad with Tulane Medical Center, which is across the street. They were traveling in a convoy of amphibious vehicles, and Curiel said the vehicle behind him was targeted. About an hour later, another gunman opened fire at the back of Charity Hospital. "We got back to Charity Hospital with food from Tulane, and we said, okay, the snipers are behind us. Let's move on," Curiel said. "We started loading patients for transport, and 20 minutes later, shots rang out. The National Guard soldiers told staff to get away from the windows, and evacuations were halted." Further on down the article, evacuations by boat were halted after armed looters threatened medics and overturned one of their boats. Widespread looting and random gunfire have been reported across New Orleans. Police told CNN that groups of armed men roamed the streets overnight. Further on that specific story of men roaming the streets, yet another CNN article details this. Officers warned a CNN crew to stay off the streets because of escalating danger, and cautioned others about attempted shootings and rapes by gangs of young men. Now that word, I'm just going to call non-consensual S. Okay, so we're going to refer to that as NCS from now on so we can stay on YouTube. Even with the National Guard there and in the thousands, The reports from New Orleans police officers on the ground reported scenes like this. Bodies began rotting on Main Street. Gunmen continued to fire on troops and rescue helicopters, and police officials said that many officers had stopped reporting for duty, cutting manpower by 20%. One New Orleans police officer wept as he described seeing bodies riddled with bullets and the top of one man's head shot off. He said some looters were armed with AK-47 rifles and compared the situation with Somalia, with police outnumbered and outgunned by gangs and trucks. How many people would have to be lying at this point to keep the idea going that none of this was happening? This is not a form of the telephone game, where one person's claim gets more and more exaggerated by the next person telling it. No, you're getting first-hand accounts from people detailing the exact things they saw, the exact encounters they faced. Did the doctor make up the man in the white shirt at him? Did the CNN reporter lie in the article? Did this police officer lie to reporters, or once again, are they running completely fabricated stories? This goes beyond just the so-called mistaken statements Mayor Nagin and Chief Compass were making. In fact, the more we read these first-hand accounts, it keeps adding validity to the original statements they made. We in fact don't even know the extent to how bad it really was in the first few days, as communications were severely limited. News crews could only get so far on their own, and there was plenty of places they simply couldn't go. Plenty of things they in fact were not allowed to film. This article from the 9th of September states, US and international media outlets have complained of attacks on staff and the confiscation of film of shootouts between police and looters in the first days after the storm devastated the Gulf region. On September 1st, police in New Orleans ripped a camera off the neck of Lucas Oliniak of the Toronto Star, who had photographed clashes between police and looters. They removed memory cards, robbing Oliniak of more than 350 images, which included shots of officers delivering a fierce beating to two suspects, an assault so fearsome one of the suspects defecated, the Toronto Star reported. The same day, Gordon Russell of the New Orleans-based Times-Picayune wrote that he and a New York Times photographer, whom he did not name, were forced to flee the scene of a shootout between police and residents near the convention center where hurricane victims were awaiting evacuation after officers slammed the journalists against a wall and threw their gear to the ground. And at the very end of the article, journalists have also been assaulted by looters, and one was shot and wounded in an apparent robbery attempt. So as you can see, even the journalists did not escape the victimization from the looters. I could think of some modern journalists I'd like to send into these conditions myself, but regardless, what you have already seen in all the news reports and documentaries has been heavily curated. Footage and images of events were completely destroyed that would certainly serve to add more context to what was really going on in New Orleans when the police were overburdened, the power was out, and chaos reigned. Keep that in mind as we now move into the info we have on what was happening at the Superdome and the Convention Center.
You don't know who's here. You got people that's druggies, you got people that's and doing everything they can, doing breaking in and looting and everything. You understand?
Not far from each other, the two became a refuge for those seeking shelter when it became impossible for them to stay at their homes. The Superdome already had 10,000 people there on the 28th, the day before the storm hit. It was designated as an emergency shelter, and so a majority of the attention went to this facility. The numbers quickly swelled during the storm and in the days after as houses began to flood. The Superdome, at its highest, was estimated to have held 30,000 people. The convention center, though not a designated emergency shelter, became one for obvious reasons, and so the numbers there grew at the highest to 25,000 people. At both of these locations, all sorts of criminality took place, and this has been severely downplayed after the fact.
You're getting ready to see something that I'm not sure you're ready to see. There are people standing out there, have been in that freaking Superdome for 5 days, watching dead bodies, watching hooligans killing people, raping people.
There's not one iota of evidence to show that anyone was killed or raped in the dome. But you have to realize we were hearing these rumors and we were believing these things as well initially.
The deputy chief in that clip would like you to think there was no homicides, no NCS. Yet this is contradicted by first-hand accounts of those who were in the dome describing things not that they had heard from others, but that they had seen themselves. Sent in on August 31st, DMAT, Disaster Medical Assistance Team, CA6 from out of California, was on the ground at the Superdome, there to provide medical assistance and to evacuate those in need of immediate care. Here are some of their accounts, as later reported by a local radio station.
On the morning of Wednesday, August 31st, 2005, a group of 35 doctors, nurses, and other specialists traveled by convoy from Baton Rouge to New Orleans. Their assignment? Provide medical assistance at the New Orleans Arena to thousands stranded at the Superdome and to facilitate the removal of critical patients by helicopter. By this time, chaos had already erupted in the city. Supervisor nurse specialist Ron Lopez recalls the team's drive to the Superdome.
Yeah, at one point, a desperate family with their loved one in a hospital bed rolled the hospital bed in front of the lead truck and said, "You guys aren't going anywhere until our mama gets help," period. So grandma and mattress and all got loaded aboard a military deuce and a half big truck, and that's about the time the shots started ringing out. And then after that, there was some return fire, but we kept going.
The frustration level among the tens of thousands stranded in and around the Superdome was high. Tensions flared. According to team members, numerous assault victims in the crowd were brought to the clinic, some severely beaten. As time passed, the crowds outside the clinic became larger and more desperate. Guardsmen assigned to the clinic security detail were called away, and several people forced their way into the clinic area to grab supplies. Several DMAT members were reportedly physically assaulted. On September 1st, with their supplies nearly exhausted and no way to effectively protect his team, Commander David Lippin made the decision and ordered the abandonment of their mission.
With the radio, I heard a call for help from our folks. They said that those 14 soldiers who were protecting our area got pulled off. Now this crowd of people that was at our front door, there were no soldiers in between us and them, and so they start coming in and getting into altercations, physical altercations with our staff. And I remember telling him, if it's not secure for us, we can't stay. And he said, well, then I advise you to leave. So we had a brief conversation, our folks who were there, and we decided that we would probably trigger that riot if they saw us packing up and leaving. And so the method we chose to leave was in small groups of 1 and 2. We just sort of sent people, pointed at people and told them, go back down to the trucks, which are on the arena floor, and just climb in the back of the truck and sit and wait. And, it took us maybe a half an hour to slowly do that. We left all the patients, we left all the medical supplies, we left all of our own personal equipment, everything there. We climbed into the trucks and drove off.
DMAT Team Commander David Lippin. Reports on the number of people who died at the Superdome vary, but the official number often cited is 6. Physician's assistant Barbara Morita and other team members contend that the number was much higher than that.
My understanding is that those 6 bodies were the bodies that were abandoned, that were left behind, and were found when the crews went in. We know that there are people in our areas, in the medical areas, who didn't make it, and we have heard reports from other teams that there were patients who were put onto helicopters, still alive, who had died by the time that they were offloaded at the airport. So that the 6 that died, I think, are just the tip of the iceberg.
So what we learned from their own accounts after the fact is they were stopped on the way there, and this altercation led to a shout that the medical team was assaulted as soon as their area was no longer guarded. One might wonder why they would need guards in the first place. Well, there's your answer. And finally, the real key to unlocking what the conditions were really like is the fact that the deaths were way underreported. As Barbara, the last lady to speak, just said, there were bodies in their area that didn't get reported, and that the reason the final number was 6 was only because 6 bodies were left behind by the time everyone was out. An NPR article reports they were only there for 24 hours before they had to leave for their own safety, and as you just heard, once they decided to leave, they had to be careful about concealing this so they didn't trigger a riot. In the short time they were there, from the 31st to the 1st of September, they treated gunshot and stab wound victims, and unlike what the deputy chief said, this team also dealt with NCS victims. Commander Dave Lippin, the one who made the decision to pull his team out, said before heading into New Orleans, he thought the rampant violence was overreported. But after being there himself, he felt it was actually underreported.
The California Disaster Medical Assistance Team spent 24 hellish hours inside the Superdome. Team members said they delivered babies, treated gunshot and stab wounds, and ultimately fled for their own safety. Commander Dave Lippin says they saw 2 women who said they'd been raped, different women from those the police attended to. He says they only saw a fraction of the desperate people who sought assistance. Lippin says when he arrived in Baton Rouge and turned on the television, he was surprised by reports of rampant violence in New Orleans.
I think that was probably overreported, and so now I think it's probably swung the other direction. I think it's underreported. I don't know why. My sense now is that there are victims out there whose stories haven't been heard.
The reported stories of the time detail first-hand accounts from people who had seen the violence for themselves. One woman said she saw a man being brought in that was covered in blood from the 7 stab wounds he received. A man reported he was beaten himself, but he also stated another man he witnessed was beaten to death. Stories of shots fired at the Superdome, of course, came in as well. One man said he heard 7 shots go off, then witnessed the man responsible run off with the gun in his hand. Another report had it that a National Guard shot himself in the leg fighting off 2 men at the Superdome. Now, this is the part that no documentary will ever tell you when discussing what was happening at the Superdome. British and Australian tourists were in New Orleans at the time Katrina struck, and so, like many of the residents, they had no real means of escaping the path of the storm. Most ended up at the Superdome, and here are some of their accounts. A group of Britons have been escorted out of the New Orleans Superdome to ensure their safety. Jamie Trout, 22 from Sunderland, was among 50 tourists stranded in horrific conditions in the devastated city. They had joined up to 30,000 people taking refuge from Hurricane Katrina in the venue. But Mr. Trout's family said the group was escorted to a nearby hotel by the National Guard after the Britons were targeted by others in the shelter. He witnessed a good deal of violence, with scuffles going on and people breaking things. The group really feared for their safety because they were being targeted because they were the only white people there. He said of his eventual Superdome refuge, there was a lot of heat from the people in there, people shouting racial abuse about us being white. Another young tourist named Stuart Bird had this to say. Unable to sit down, move, eat, or drink, he says people were just shouting at us. We were basically getting racially abused all the time. A man standing next to him threatened to get a gun out and shoot all the white people. Facing this abuse, an Australian man took it upon himself to gather all of the tourists together so they could defend themselves. Realizing that foreigners were a target, Mr. Hopes and the other Aussies gathered tourists from Europe, South America, and elsewhere into one part of the building. There were 65 of us, so we were able to look after each other, especially the girls who were being grabbed and threatened, Mr. Hopes said. He said they had organized escorts for the women when they had gone for food or to the toilet, and rosters to keep guard while others slept. We sat through the night just watching each other, not knowing if we would be alive in the morning. John McNeil, 20 of Brisbane, said the worst point had come after 2 days when soldiers had told them the power in the dome was failing and there was only 10 minutes worth of gas left. I looked at Bud and said, "That will be the end of us," Mr. McNeil said. The gangs knew where we were. If the lights had gone out, we would have been in deep trouble. We prayed for a miracle and the lights stayed on. It wasn't just apparent to the tourists the danger they found themselves in, but also the National Guardsmen. One in particular, named Sergeant Garland Ogden. He quite literally had to break multiple rules to save them from crowds who forced the white tourists into a defensive position. At one point, up to 30 British students gathered in the dome were so terrified of attack when the power went down that they set up a makeshift security cordon. Zoe Smith, 21 from Hull, said, "All us girls sat in the middle while the boys sat on the outside with chairs as protection. We were absolutely terrified. The situation had descended into chaos, people were very hostile, and the living conditions were horrendous. We had to wash with tiny bottles of water. The sink was blocked and full of gunk. Even when we offered to help with the cleaning, the locals gave us abuse." Many of the girls were threatened with NCS, and as it is reported, one Brazilian woman had fended off 4 men who were attempting to take her into an empty room to NCS her. So in response to this treatment, Sergeant Ogden and Bud Hopes took action. Food was running out. Knife-wielding addicts were smoking crack in the Knife-wielding addicts were smoking crack in bathrooms overflowing with feces. Gunshots rattled the dome. A man jumped to his death from the upper tiers, and Bud had seen a grown man attempt to SA a 10-year-old. The stench was unbearable. All of it was about to get worse, with the imminent shutdown of the power generators, which would leave thousands of hot, hungry, and damp storm victims in complete darkness. No one really wanted to help us get out of that place, said Hopes in an interview with News Corp Australia this week. Garland, I call him Sarge, was the only one who did, and when he said those words, "I will help you," it was set in stone. Ogden, acting alone and against his superior's orders, hatched a plot to secretly spirit about 65 tourists out of the dome to safety. He was their guardian angel, said Hopes. Further down the page, by the 3rd day, Garland learned the generators were about to go down, and the Superdome would be left in complete darkness. The National Guard's order were to withdraw from the dome for their own safety. When Sarge told me, I was like, "What? Give me a gun, I need a gun," Hope said. Sarge looked at me and said, "The only guns I got are this one, and he held out his fists. He said, "I'm going to stay here and fight with you, buddy." It was the most amazing thing anyone has said to me in my life. I just felt I had to watch over them for some reason, says Ogden. I had to take care of these people because they were in a strange country, far from home. And what if this was my daughter in their country? Things were about to get ugly. What would I want them to do with her? Ogden told Hopes he would sneak out the tourists in groups of 3 to 6 at a time, 100 meters across the Superdome floor to an exit and across to a nearby sports arena where the elderly and sick were being held. They were already having trouble. If the power went out and the guard left, it would get a lot worse very quickly, Ogden said. It wasn't going to be easy. The fact almost all the tourists were fair-skinned was bound to spark outrage over favoritism and racism. The gradual exodus, starting with the women, would take several hours, and the directions were clear. Keep your heads down, don't look happy, don't look like you're getting out. The first few groups made it without a hitch, but soon a crowd caught onto the plot and an angry mob gathered, hurling abuse and grabbing at bags. Bud and I were in the last group, and we got hammered on the way out, McNeil said. As we were walking out, this guy grabbed me by the scuff of my neck and slammed me against the wall and said, "Where the f*** are you guys going? Why are you getting out of here?" Outside the doors now, Ogden bluffed an armed guard who tried to stop them. I said the general let us do it, which was not really true, and the group made it to the sports arena. That was Wednesday, the 31st of August, 3 days after the tourists entered the dome, and they later holed up at the New Orleans Hyatt before evacuating the city by that Friday. Hopes and Ogden saluted each other as the tourist bus drove away. Here's a true hero, a man that if our media wasn't run by the tunnel dwellers would have his own movie. But no, his name goes unsung with just a few articles detailing his heroism. Outside the dome, and other tourists were having their own similar problems. One Canadian man noted to himself, "I fear I will die here," he wrote, caught in a crossfire between rampaging groups. Tourists are being preyed upon. Another tourist from Britain decided to wait out the storm in the Ramada Hotel. He quickly, like those at the Superdome, had to organize patrols and had to barricade his family for their protection. At night, the police presence disappeared altogether, leaving the stranded guests and staff to defend themselves. You would hear shots ringing out during the night, and that was one of the most worrying things because we had no security, Mr. Scott said. We patrolled the halls and checked the doors throughout the night in the hotel. But if someone had wanted to come in, there was not much we could have done about it. They had a torch, but Mr. Scott said, you knew if you went down in the dark, the torch would only make you a better target. Nevertheless, the staff and guests had managed to chase one group of looters from the building, he added. And to end this article, Mr. Scott told the BBC he had ripped wires attached to the speakers from the walls of the flooded hotel bar and tied tables and chairs together as makeshift barricades. In another article, in the days that followed the devastating hurricane, guests at the luxury Ramada Hotel were forced to barricade themselves in as floodwaters swamped the streets and looters ran riot. Jed and a group of fellow male guests banded together as the city descended into mayhem. Sandra, 37, said, "We heard there were looters armed with guns. Every time he left the room, my fear was that Jed would get shot. I knew that he would confront anyone before they got to me and our son, Ronan." Jed, 36, said, "We took it in turns to do 2-hour shifts patrolling the corridors. Sometimes you would hear a noise at the end of a dark corridor, and you would think to yourself, do I really want to find out what that is?" Can you imagine, night after night with no power, no authority, only you and those you care about versus who knows how many violent and armed looters, not out for food and water and shelter, but anything valuable they could find. And sometimes that valuable thing was not an item, but a person. According to Jed, the officers were no better. "I could not describe how bad the authorities were, taking photographs of us as we are standing on the roof waving for help, for their own personal photo albums, little snapshot photographs." He said at one point a group of girls were standing on the roof of the hotel lobby and called to passing rescuers for help. They, the authorities, said to them, "Well, show us what you got," doing signs for them to lift up their t-shirts. The girls said no, and they said, "Well, fine," and motored off down the road in their motorboat. That's the sort of help we had from the authorities, he said. Those that were actually trying to help were later reporting things like this. "We're having some pretty intense gun battles breaking out around the city," said Captain Jeff Wynn of the New Orleans Police SWAT team. "Armed gangs of from 8 to 15 young men are riding around in pickup trucks, looting and..." In fact, the same SWAT team would at some point make several entries into the convention center in search of multiple gunmen.
Captain Marlon DeFillo, a spokesman for the New Orleans Police Department, insisted there were police at the convention center, but they were overwhelmed. He said courageous officers attempted to disarm the criminals inside.
The SWAT team had made several entries into the convention center and could not see the gunmen. What they had to rely on was the muzzle flashes to decide where the gunfire may have been coming from. And of course, we could not return gunfire because of the potential for innocent persons being injured.
Eddie Compass was at one point subject to the criminal horde as they attempted to hold him hostage.
Our police chief almost got kidnapped. He was trying to calm the crowd out at the convention center, and they basically got in the middle of a crowd, and the guys tried to basically take him as a hostage.
It was so bad at the convention center, he sent in 88 officers, only for them to come out on the losing end. There were shootings at night, armed gangs began dividing up the convention center, the Louisiana Army National Guard showed up for a few days and then evacuated for their own safety. Now, I'm going to quote from this NBC article, and it's a long one, so be prepared, but everything here is worth hearing. In more than 70 interviews with both military and law enforcement officials who were themselves sometimes inside the center, and with many of the survivors who suffered over the course of several nights, a chilling portrait emerges of anarchy and violence exacerbated by young men from rival housing projects, Magnolia, St. Bernard, Iberville, and Calliope. Everywhere I went, I saw people with guns in their hands, said Troy Harris, 18. They were putting guns to people's heads. Recounting pleas for milk for their babies, for food, for protection, many survivors described the same sense of bewilderment and anger, broadcast surreally on live television. "This is America," one woman shouted into the TV camera. What she meant was, "This is not supposed to happen here." Linda Cash, 26, arrived with her 2 children, Clarence, 6, and Siren, 2. "Soon as I got there," Cash recalled, "I saw fighting. I saw people throwing chairs, people pulling guns out, right in front of little children." Near where Cash had hunkered down Monday night, she noticed a little boy having difficulty breathing. She figured he was having an asthma attack or an anxiety attack. She and others nearby spotted a too seldom seen police officer. The officer came over, his gun drawn. Cash said she pointed to the young boy. The officer checked the boy, Cash remembered, then turned to us and said there was nothing he could do. The officer vanished, the boy was dead, a death confirmed by 3 others interviewed for this story. Another officer soon appeared, and Cash and the others figured he would remove the child. But that officer told us he had come over to our area to check on some guns he heard near us, she said. The body stayed there. By Tuesday, the center's population had exploded to nearly 20,000. The lights never came on for some reason all the way, Cash said. And among those thousands were gangsters, though maybe not members of gangs. Community activists for years have been warning the city's leadership about the folly of mixing youths from one housing project with youths from another. "You declare martial law," said Jazz Washington, a community activist. "And to these gangsters, that just means we can kill you and keep moving." A gang broke into the locked alcohol storage areas and suddenly had 50 cases of hard liquor and 200 cases of beer. And before long, there were scenes of gangsters, drunk, grabbing after young girls. And those scenes, not far from the ones of women in corners, balled up, praying all frozen with a Hobson's choice, the gangsters or the floodwaters. Troy Harris, 18, who had survived a gunshot to the stomach on the hard streets of New Orleans, thought he could handle himself anywhere in the city. The darkened convention center gravely tested his moxie. "They were robbing people in there, at gunpoint," he said. "Somebody robbed me of $100. Even police were afraid," Harris said. "I saw police officers in the bathroom taking off their uniforms," he said. "I'm telling you, they were taking off their uniforms and throwing their badges down." Leon Doby saw prostrate bodies near the bathroom. Dead or unconscious, he didn't know. At one point, a police car drove up. Perhaps good news. Perhaps ships were steaming up the Mississippi over there right now. A police officer tossed out a few bottles and drove off. It ignited a free-for-all. Doby himself looked on in horror as a man, arguing over the water, struck another man with a 2x4. "That man, he was split in the head," said Doby. "He was leaking. He just dropped face first." Back inside, Doby was stilled by yet another confrontation. 3 women were arguing over what everyone seemed to be arguing about: lack of food, water, space. One of the women, a snap of the finger quick, plunged a pair of scissors into the shoulder of the woman she had been arguing with. And to end this section is another example of whites having to be rescued from these third world conditions. A Jefferson Parish police deputy had appealed to SWAT team captain Jeff Wynn for help in bringing out his wife and a female relative from the center. He knew they were there and was hearing nightmarish stories, said Gontier, who declined to identify the officer for security reasons. Wynn approved the mission. When the SWAT team entered at 11 a.m., the Jefferson Parish officer called out his wife's name. She heard him, and along with the relative rushed to his side. The SWAT team put the women in the middle of the team, then backed out the door. Once it became clear that the SWAT team had come with the single goal of rescuing 2 white women, anger exploded. An elderly couple reported they and other whites were having their lives threatened. Valenti and her husband, two of very few white people in the almost exclusively black refugee camp, said she and other whites were threatened with murder yesterday. In fact, the whites weren't the only ones being threatened and assaulted by the majority population during Katrina. At the convention center, the Vietnamese were dealing with the same problems.
Amid this seething city of evacuees was a group of 300 Vietnamese who had fled from the Mary Queen of Vietnam Catholic Church in the Micho district when the roof blew off. Inside the convention center, the men formed a protective ring around their women and children. Ronnie Nguyen, a 31-year-old computer technician, said a few young African Americans tried to provoke them, but the Vietnamese refused to fight back, fearing a race riot.
We don't want to fight with them. We don't want to mess with them at all.
There's too many of them.
Yeah, it's too many of them. And then we in the dark, we have no light at all. So we don't know what's going to happen. They might get a gun, get a knife. We might get hurt from there.
What?
We just gonna knock you out.
You can't win. I just said.
No fight. Do you like your life?
What?
You like fuck?
That's what you are.
I'll put my.
What?
Uh-oh.
Which one? I got two.
The older one.
Which one?
The older ones.
Yo, just say you gonna fuck them.
Y'all got no.
Oh, guess what? You won't get anywhere near my sister.
I'll throw this fucking.
If you dare, then I might as well throw a golf stick at you, and I have one in the back.
I'll get my little brother to fuck your young ass.
Oh, guess what? I'm not gonna even let them get anywhere near me. How would I let someone who probably descended from a lowly beggar?
She's not even talking right. I lowly beggar.
Probably you're broke already because of buying yourself something. You can't even wear your pants correctly.
Why the fuck you looking at my?
You're the one who flaunts it like something that is.
Looking at it, I know it's but damn.
Why would I ever look at you? You're
if I went fuck around, bring a chum out the nose, dummy.
Probably you ain't got a dick because it's all cut up.
Yo, say you probably ain't got a dick because it's all cut up.
This shit. Little Migo ass. What the fuck you eating? Oh God, hella onions in your shit. Onions and water.
Ugly Chinese bitch. That's why if you don't get your bitch ass from around here, we gonna rob your fucking store, bitch. Fuck you talking about? I'm gonna put my foot in your little Chinese ass too, bitch. And I'm gonna f your sister.
It seemed no one was exempt from the lawlessness, not even the children. Keep in mind before I play this, there is only supposed to be 4 deaths and only 1 was a killing. This will shortly be shown to be false.
The exact death toll is unknown. Police say they recovered 4 to 6 bodies. Evacuees told of scores of corpses. News reports put the body count as high as 24. The one death that stood out to most of the people I spoke with was that of a young girl whose name no one knew. Doris Bailey is a 24-year-old medical technician who was stranded at the convention center with a co-worker. She had also evacuated to Austin.
In one of the bathrooms, you had a little girl. She could have been maybe 13. She had her clothes were like ripped, so she could have been. I can say she could have. She was lifeless, and a lot of people were saying that she had been in the bathroom for maybe a day or two. So I don't know.
Another account states a similar claim of a girl around the same age with the addition of a young boy, sitting with her daughter and other relatives. Trollkin Joseph, 37, said men had wandered the cavernous convention center in recent nights. She said she found a dead 14-year-old girl at 5 a.m. this morning, 4 hours after the young girl went missing from her parents inside the convention center. She was for 4 hours until she was, Joseph said through tears. Another child, a 7-year-old boy, was found and in the kitchen freezer last night. Several others interviewed by Reuters told similar stories of the abuse but they could not be independently verified. This might be because they weren't allowed. When trying to gain access to where the bodies were placed, the location reported by those stuck at the convention center, a National Guardsman refused entry. It doesn't need to be seen. It's a makeshift morgue in there, he told a Reuters photographer. We're not letting anyone in there anymore. If you want to take pictures of dead bodies, go to Iraq. But what if the account comes from a National Guardsman? As reported in the Times-Picayune, Arkansas National Guardsman Mikael Brooks stepped through the food service entrance of the Ernest N. Memorial Convention Center Monday, flipped on the light at the end of his machine gun, and started pointing out bodies. "Don't step in that blood, it's contaminated," he said. "That one with his arms sticking up in the air, he's an old man." Then he shined a light on the smaller human figure under the white sheet next to the elderly man. "That's a kid," he said. "There's another one in the freezer, a 7-year-old with her." He moved on, walking quickly through the darkness, pulling his camouflage shirt over his face to screen out the overwhelming odor. "There's an old woman," he said, pointing to a wheelchair covered by a sheet. "I escorted her in myself, and that old man got blood to death," he said of the body lying on the floor next to the wheelchair. Brooks and several other guardsmen said they had between 30 and 40 more bodies in the convention center's freezer. "It's not on, but at least you can shut the door," said fellow guardsman Philip Thompson. Later on in the article, one of the bodies, they said, was a girl they estimated to be 5 years old. Though they could not confirm it, they had heard she was. There was an old lady that said the little girl had been by 2 or 3 guys and that she had told another unit. But they said they couldn't do anything about it with all the people here, Brooks said. "I would have put him in cuffs, stuck him in the freezer, and left him there." That's a lot more than 4 bodies and a lot more than 1 confirmed homicide. Are we supposed to believe Brooks is lying? As it's reported, he was showing the reporters as well. Are they lying? These accounts can't be said to be mistaken, something someone heard from another and blown up before the police chief or the mayor gets on camera and speaks on it before they confirm it. No, this is a first-hand account. Multiple first-hand accounts. This either happened or it didn't. The numbers are either much higher and the depths of depravity much lower, or Brooks and the reporters here made it up. Given the police later covered up multiple homicides themselves and even had autopsy reports contain lies by omission and leaving out the cause of death, it's clear the chances are much more in the favor of this story being true. To briefly cover what I'm referring to here, because I know this video is getting long, one man, as the PBS Frontline documentary covers, was shot by police. The people who found him didn't know he was shot by police, so they took him to the nearest command post where they had medical supplies and people who could treat the man. When they arrived, the police handcuffed them, and per the victims' accounts, they were beaten and the car with the dying man was driven off. This car was later found by a former law enforcement officer, Istvan Baylog, completely torched with the skeletal remains of Henry Glover inside. His skull was clearly damaged by a bullet, and it was no question this discovery was that of a homicide in the eyes of Istvan. Later on, the skull goes missing, and a reporter named A.C. Thomas finds the autopsy report of Henry Glover showing his body was burned, but it didn't list a cause of death. Following the trail, the reporter soon uncovers what the police intended to stay covered. Years after Katrina, and 3 officers were convicted of charges in relation to the death of Henry Glover and its cover-up.
It turns out that the author of the unfinished Glover report had also signed off on the police account of the incident at Danziger Bridge, a report that federal prosecutors now say was largely fabricated. According to officers who have pled guilty in the Danziger Bridge case, a cover-up of the killings began almost immediately.
A lieutenant told the officers involved in the shooting to get their stories straight. There were secret meetings held. One man is accused of getting a gun from his house and filing into the court record as being a gun that was used by civilians on the bridge that day.
Here is a clear-cut example of the kind of cover-ups that were happening during the chaotic days in the aftermath of Katrina. Officers shot civilians and immediately moved to cover it up. Many officers later convicted in this incident. The point of bringing this up is the fact that if they were willing to cover these things up, willing to later go on TV and retract their stories that just so happen to be independently confirmed by multiple other accounts, then perhaps they are more than willing to lie about the actual happenings at the Superdome and the Convention Center. Shootings and stabbings, NCS, and murders. All incidents that didn't take place with officer involvement, which means much less scrutiny and a lot less paperwork. All they had to do was make the official number something else, and now all of these stories are somehow supposed to be untrue. To show the level of corruption at this time, here's a clip of Chief of Police Eddie Compass and Deputy Chief Riley being confronted on the fact that some officers carried around guns to plant on people.
Some former officers we've talked to have said, hey, this was an underground culture. They would carry around something they call a ham sandwich, and they would plant that ham sandwich at the scene of officer-involved shootings. Did you ever hear anything about that?
Nope. That's not on my radar. I didn't know nothing about that. Like I said, that investigation was done under Chief Riley's watch. No,
but I mean over time. They said, look, this was handed down.
I don't really recall ever having those type of conversations. I'm telling you straight up.
When was the first time you ever heard the term ham sandwich?
And that bill of information.
You never heard of a ham sandwich before that?
Never heard. Within NOPD, you have several different cultures as well. And that was a culture I was not a part of.
Knowing this, let's take into consideration some of the wilder claims that received little credibility then, and surely even some of you may still think doubtfully about it now. But nonetheless, it is still worth mentioning. Whites outside of the city, mainly across the bridge in Algiers Point, decided to grab their guns and protect themselves and their home from the mayhem happening on the other side of the bridge. Multiple residents are on video stating frankly they had shot multiple people.
We shot them. They were looters. It was great. It was like pheasant season in South Dakota.
One man in particular quickly produced the number 38 after he was asked how many people he killed.
Did you have any problems with looters? Not anymore. But you did.
They're all dead.
What happened?
We shot them.
How many people you shoot?
38.
38 people. What did you do with the bodies? You take them to?
Gave them to the Coast Guard.
Proof of these claims has never been produced, but it's not hard to see why, on the side of the residents, why they would want to prove this. It may also be incumbent upon the officials of New Orleans as well to leave this be, given how badly they want to downplay how bad things really were. Remember way earlier in the video when I mentioned hundreds of mercenaries were roaming the city as well? Well, even one of them had something to say on record.
And so I was talking to his head of security, a guy named Michael Montgomery, and he told me that he was with a company based in Alabama called Bodyguard and Tactical Security. But as I talked to this man who said that he had spiked your car, he told me a very scary story and that I think is the source for potential litigation against these private security firms. Michael Montgomery, the head of BATS, said that on the second night he was in New Orleans, he was going to pick up one of Mr. Quinn's associates. They got stopped in the 9th Ward. He said they came under fire from a group of people on an overpass he described as black gangbangers. He said, at the time I was on the phone with my business partner, and I said, what did you do then? He said, I dropped the phone and opened fire. And I said, what kind of weapons? AR-15 assault rifles and Glock 9s. Fired up at the people he described as black gangbangers on this bridge. And I said, what? And then what happened? Did you kill them? He said, well, let's just put it this way. I heard a lot of moaning and screaming, and the shooting stopped. Enough said. Well, then he said that the Army came and responded to the incident, surrounded and thought we were the enemy. That's how he said it. He said, I then explained to the Army soldiers that we were security. They didn't care. They didn't file a report. They left. 5 minutes later, Louisiana State Troopers come. They ask what happened. He explains the story to them. They then ask him, how do we get out of the city? So this is the climate of impunity. This man, and as Michael Ratner of the Center for Constitutional Rights points out, how do we know that he was fired upon? How do we know what that incident was? And why wouldn't law enforcement file any kind of a report on a shootout in which this guy is openly bragging to having shot up a bunch of people he described as black gangbangers on an overpass?
As Jeremy points out, a very key detail is that here's a shooting that, given the details we've covered so far in the video, is likely to have happened, and yet no police report was filed. Who's to say what the hell was really going on? The people on the ground are telling similar stories, yet the top-down information controllers want you to take their word instead. For this account, I can't say I myself fully believe it, And there's even debate on if this person even said these things, but Chris Kyle, the American sniper himself, was reported to have said he was perched on the top of the Superdome and was picking off looters. Now, given the amount of helicopter footage we have of the Superdome, and he's not seen once, that clearly disproves this, along with the fact no one reported consistent sniper fire coming from the roof of the dome. Other than being placed on top of the Superdome, if he was alive to clarify this and he said that he really did pick off 30 looters, I honestly would be inclined to believe him. But take that claim or any of the other claims in this video however you want. To finish off this video, we will discuss now the most unexplainable behavior during this entire period of violence and chaos. Some people can excuse the looting, even the looting of valuable items instead of just food and water. People knew they weren't going to face the consequences, so they went for it. Some people may get that. Harder to explain is surely the violence, the shooting at first responders and hospital staff, the robbing of narcotics from doctors, and of course, all of the things we've covered in the dome. But what you can't square in a situation like this is the amount of men from the majority population of New Orleans that decided that with the lawlessness, with the fact they weren't being watched and no one was there to stop them, they decided to hunt women. An NPR report came out in December specifically detailing the victimization of women that occurred in New Orleans during this time. Accounts verified by physical checks from medical staff where the victim details not just her being targeted, but the women around her as well.
One of the victims is Ms. Lewis, a 46-year-old home healthcare worker from New Orleans East who asked that her first name not be used. She sits on the edge of a bed in a dingy, dimly lit room in a motel in Baton Rouge. She begins her story on Monday, August 29, the day of the storm.
On Monday, we didn't have any lights, we didn't have any water. It was dark and some terrible things happened there. Some bad things happened and there's nobody there to protect you.
As Ms. Lewis attempts to relate the details of her attack, she is unable to continue.
They just left us to die. Nobody cares. Oh, God help me.
The account of her rape was verified by a trained forensic nurse at Earl K. Long Hospital in Baton Rouge, where Ms. Lewis sought treatment. She and others had taken refuge in the Redemption Elderly Apartments in the Irish Channel section of New Orleans. On that first night after the storm, the city had lost power and she was sleeping in a dark hallway trying to catch a breeze. It was there, she says, that an unknown man with a handgun attacked her. She insists other women were in the same apartment building over the next 4 nights, but her claim could not be checked out. After her rape, Ms. Lewis says there were no clinics open, and so she washed herself with bleach.
And all I could do was pray. Pray for rescue. Pray so I didn't have any type of transmitted disease.
Ms. Lewis says later in the week, National Guardsmen forced evacuees out of the building at gunpoint, and she was finally able to leave the city on Saturday. She says she tried to report the assault at the time.
When you tried to talk to them, they just didn't care. They didn't want to hear anything. The police was overburdened and stressed out themselves. They didn't have food, they didn't have water, they didn't have communication, they didn't have ammunition. The National Guards just didn't want to hear it.
Even after the Superdome and Convention Center were evacuated, and those that lost their homes were transported to other parts of the country that quickly saw a rise in violent crime, particularly Houston, the gangs still roamed the streets, continuing the same behavior even after the National Guard showed up. On the 6th of September, a woman named Anastasia was victimized in broad daylight.
It was, experts say, the perfect environment to commit a crime and the worst environment to report a crime. The police department, reeling from desertions, flooding, and the immensity of the disaster, was in a survival mode itself, and civil order had completely broken down. Anastasia is a petite 25-year-old hairdresser who asked that her last name be omitted. She contacted the New Orleans police in October and filed a report that she was beaten with a bat and on September 6th in broad daylight next to a flooded McDonald's at Gentilly Boulevard and Elysian Fields near her father's house.
You know, I should have been smarter being a small person.
She sits on a sofa in a shabby rent house in central Louisiana where she's recovering, surrounded by dark and depressing artwork that she's been painting since the attack. Anastasia says thugs were still wandering the streets of her neighborhood more than a week after the flood.
I think after 8 days, they just believed. I mean, I didn't see any police officers. I could have gotten away with murder. It was that terrible. So I can assume what criminals were thinking, and that's exactly what happened.
To drive home the point, New Orleans was already dealing with a reported NCS every other day, and those working in the field said it was surely worse during the days when there was no law. So now, here we are at the end of the video. Does it seem far-fetched to think the initial reporting was actually accurate? Everything Nagin and Compass and many of the news outlets later came out to say was false reporting was at some point sourced as a first-hand account from people on the ground that would have little reason to lie. A drug addict in a Superdome or convention center telling you NCS and murders happening not only to adults but children, and that there's stacks of bodies hidden in the freezer, well, that would be one thing. But when your source is actually coming from Arkansas National Guardsmen, members of a medical team out of California, and British and Australian tourists, the last two having to flee for their lives, well, it becomes a lot harder to call that misreporting. How about the first responders being shot at? Eddie Compass said he heard it from a guy who heard it from a guy. Well, perhaps those who originally told it should be mentioned because it's recorded in print. Major Joey Broussard made the same claims. Dr. Tyler Curiel, working at Tulane, had to halt operations after he saw a man in a white shirt shooting at him. Returning to work after a period, they figured it was over, and it happened again. Police running out of ammunition in gunfights. Deputy Chief Riley throws doubt on that.
I heard an officer request on the radio. He said, "I need more ammo. We need more ammo." Oh, imagine, I mean, that's what you hear in the movies. That's what you see in a war movie. You don't hear that in the urban policing where you're out of ammo.
Yet a CNN transcript has Chris Lawrence reporting the police resorting to defending the police station from the rooftop. Chris Lawrence, CNN correspondent. Well, Aaron, right now we are holed up on a rooftop of a police station in the middle of New Orleans. Right now, it's the only safe place to be in the city. We were on the street earlier, but the police said under no circumstances would you be safe on the street. They said somebody walking in the streets of New Orleans is basically taking their lives in their hands. As they hustled us off the street, some of the officers told us groups of young men had been roaming the city, shooting at people, attempting to NCS young women. They directed some of the young women to get off the street immediately. So we are here. We're seeing helicopters circling the city, and police snipers are just lining the rooftops here, basically trying to defend this police station. Later on in the transcript, police have said, the average everyday citizen is pretty much gone. The men who are left on the street with these guns are the hardest of the hard. And one officer said, they don't respect the police. They may fear us a little bit because we have guns too, but they will not hesitate to shoot. And they feel like, the officer said, these men feel like they can take control of the city, although the officers say they're not going to let that happen. SWAT teams making multiple goes at gunmen in the convention center. 88 police officers in retreat from the same mob. The police chief almost getting kidnapped. Police officers reporting being in grisly shootings. The captain of the SWAT team himself telling about intense gun battles he's been in, shortly after describing gangs of 8 to 15 armed men roaming the streets in pickup trucks. But yeah, running out of ammo in a shootout when your armory is flooded, totally the cop radioing nonsense. It seems the misreporting truly came only after the worst had happened. In fact, if none of this happened, then really the response was an overreaction on a predominantly black population that was just trying to survive. Well, that's the exact narrative they try to push. That really the root cause of why Katrina was handled the way it was because white people are evil racists.
Mississippi may end up being the most tragic loss of all.
George Bush doesn't care about black people.
Where's the swastika, nigga? Hell, Hitler, nigga.
This incident, Bush later said, was the worst moment of his presidency. Here you go.
This from the book. I faced a lot of criticism as president. I didn't like hearing people claim that I lied about Iraq's weapons of mass destruction or cut taxes to benefit the rich. But the suggestion that I was racist because of the response to Katrina represented an all-time low.
Yeah, still feel that way as you read those words. Felt them when I heard them, felt them when I wrote them, and I felt them when I'm listening to them.
You say you told Laura at the time it was the worst moment of your presidency.
Yes.
The amount of capitulation to these people to write these words, if he even did, but regardless to stand by them, is ridiculous. Crawl on your hands and knees, leader of the free world, to kiss the ass of people who think the worst of you no matter what. Because here we come to the final point, which I will leave you on. After all that was done for them there in Katrina, past the looting, past the shooting, past the violence and the bloodshed, these people get in front of a camera, speak their minds, and they tell you they think white people blew up the levees keeping the city from flooding so they could get rid of the black population.
Around 9 o'clock, we heard a big boom noise. Boom! And it was loud, loud, loud.
Yes, I heard the explosion. We heard it first, the echo from here. Then it was here. I said, oh my God, it's the end of the world.
We heard some explosions, 2, 3. We thought about, I thought maybe it was an electrical transformer or something popping in the distance.
First I heard one boom, I thought a big transformer, converter cell. It's a transformer. But I said, we've been sitting in the door now for about 2 hours, 3 hours. But it went again. Boom, boom.
I think the lever cracked, and they helped it the rest of the week. They had a bomb. They bombed that sucker.
With an average IQ of 85, you won't be able to argue logic with these people. Anyway, we'll see how long my channel stays up. Hope to see you in another video soon.